The day my grandfather pulled me aside and whispered those 4 words, I genuinely thought old age had finally caught up with him. Never save money, son. I was maybe 12 years old. I had just dropped my coin into my little clay piggy bank, proud of myself, feeling responsible, feeling like a proper grown-up, and there he was, standing in the doorway of my bedroom with that look on his face. The look that meant he was about to say something important. I waited. He stepped closer, lowered his voice like he was sharing a secret that could get him in trouble, and said it again. Don't just save money. Make it grow. I didn't understand him then. But life has a way of teaching you things that words alone never quite can. So let me tell you a story. Not my story. The story of a man named Samuel, and how a handful of thin, half-dead chickens taught him something that years of hard labor never did. Samuel lived in a small village at the edge of a dry, cracked valley where the soil was tough and the sun had absolutely no sense of mercy. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, which meant everyone also knew about Samuel's particular talent, the talent of doing absolutely nothing. Now, to be fair to Samuel, he wasn't a lazy man in the way that some people are lazy. He didn't sleep all day. He didn't drink. He was actually, in his own way, quite busy dreaming. Every single morning, while the rest of the village was already ankle-deep in mud and hard work, Samuel found his favorite spot beneath the old tamarind tree, settled himself comfortably against the trunk, and got to work dreaming. He dreamed about the shop he was going to open. He dreamed about the cattle he was going to buy. He dreamed about the big, solid house he was going to build at the edge of the village, with a proper roof and glass windows and a front door that locked. He had detailed plans for all of it. He could describe every shelf in that imaginary shop, every cow in that imaginary field. The only thing missing from any of these dreams was the part where Samuel actually did something about them. People in the village had gone through several phases with Samuel. First they laughed at him, then they got irritated, and then, which is far worse than either, they stopped paying attention to him altogether. He became part of the scenery, like the old tamarind tree itself. Just there, harmless, going nowhere. His wife, Clara, was made of entirely different material. Clara was the kind of woman who could stretch a single handful of rice into a meal, who could sew a torn shirt so neatly you'd never know it had been ripped, who woke up before the roosters and went to sleep long after the village had gone quiet. She never complained loudly. That wasn't her style. But one evening, after a particularly hard week, she sat beside Samuel in the dim light of their small home and spoke to him in that quiet, careful voice that somehow carried more weight than shouting ever could. "Samuel," she said, "dreams are beautiful things. I have nothing against dreams. But dreams have never once put food on this table. We are falling behind. The children are growing. And I am tired." Samuel looked at her. He nodded slowly. He said, "I know, Clara. I know. Something will come. Something will change. You'll see." She looked at him for a long moment, then got up and went back to the kitchen. Something would come. Something would change. These were the words Samuel had been saying for 11 years. The night that finally broke him open happened on a Tuesday, in the middle of a week that was no different from any other week, except that the cupboards had run down to nothing. His grandson Eli, a small boy, maybe 6 years old, ribs slightly visible under a shirt that had been washed so many times it had faded to almost no color at all, came padding into the room on bare feet. He found Samuel sitting in his chair and tugged gently at his sleeve. "Grandpa," Eli whispered, "is there any bread?" It was such a small question, asked so softly, without accusation, without drama. Just a hungry child asking his grandfather a simple question. Samuel looked at Clara. Clara walked to the kitchen and opened the cupboard. She stood there for a moment without turning around. Then she turned around and shook her head. Empty. Completely empty. Samuel felt something crack inside his chest that night. Not break, crack. Like the first split in a wall that has been under pressure for a very long time. He sat in that chair and looked at his grandson's face and felt, for the first time in many years, the full and terrible weight of all the days he had spent under that tamarind tree while life moved on without him. He did not sleep that night. He lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling, and had the kind of honest conversation with himself that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. And somewhere in the early hours of the morning, before the sun came up, something shifted in him. Quietly. Permanently. By the time the sky turned gray, Samuel was already walking toward the fields. The work was harder than he remembered. His body, soft from years of comfortable sitting, screamed in protest. The valley sun was relentless. He dug and hauled and lifted and bent until his back felt like it might snap, until his hands were raw and cracked and bleeding slightly at the knuckles. He came home every evening exhausted in a way that went all the way down to his bones. But he also came home with money. Not much. A small, modest pile of coins pressed into his palm each evening. But real coins. Earned coins. He would sit with Eli after dinner and pour them onto the table and count them together, and the boy's eyes would go wide like Samuel was performing magic. "Is that a lot, Grandpa?" "Not yet," Samuel would say. "But it is something. And something is where everything starts." He kept working. And slowly, carefully, painfully, he began to understand something that troubled him deeply. Money came in, and money left. Food. Medicine. The roof patch that never fully held. Eli's shoes. Clara's cooking oil. No matter how hard he worked, the pile of coins never seemed to actually grow. It just cycled through, in one hand, out the other, and at the end of the month, he was more or less exactly where he had started. He was running on a treadmill, moving his legs as fast as he could, and going absolutely nowhere. One afternoon at the village market, he stood near a group of older men talking loudly about money, as older men in markets always seem to do. One of them, a heavy-set fellow with a satisfied look about him, slapped the counter and declared, "The man who saves is the man who survives. You put money away, little by little, and one day you look up and you have something." The words lodged themselves in Samuel's brain like a splinter. That night, he went looking through the back of the kitchen shelf until he found an old glass jar, thick and solid, with a lid that sealed tight. He brought it to the bedroom, tucked it under the bed, and made himself a promise. Every week, no matter what, no matter how tight things were, he would put something into that jar. The first coin went in with a small, clean clink. Samuel lay back on the bed and smiled at the ceiling for the first time in a long while. Saving was not pretty. He wore his shoes until the soles developed personalities of their own. He ate less. He refused to buy the small luxuries that the other field workers spent their coins on. A cold drink at midday, a small bag of roasted peanuts from the market woman. He said no to everything that wasn't absolutely necessary, and some things that probably were. Clara watched him. She didn't say much, but she watched. Eli found the jar one afternoon while playing near the bed. He pulled it out, held it up to the light, and shook it experimentally. The coins made a deeply satisfying sound. "What is this, Grandpa?" Samuel sat down on the edge of the bed, took the jar gently, and turned it in his hands. "That," he said, "is tomorrow." Months passed. The jar grew heavier. Samuel grew prouder. He started to feel something he hadn't felt in years. Not just hope, but a specific, concrete kind of hope. The kind with weight to it. The kind you can hold in your hands. The day he decided the jar was full enough, he carried it to the market with his chest out and his chin up, ready to purchase a proper supply of goods for the household. He set it on the shopkeeper's counter, lid off, coins gleaming. The shopkeeper counted carefully, took his time, then looked up with an expression that was genuinely apologetic. "Prices have gone up this season, Samuel. This amount gets you about half of what you were planning." Samuel stood very still. He picked up his jar. He walked home. He sat outside on the step as the sun went down, and he felt something he hadn't expected to feel after all that discipline, all that sacrifice, all those months of saying no to himself. He felt cheated. Not by the shopkeeper, by the system itself, by the invisible force that had been slowly eating his savings from the inside, while he congratulated himself on collecting them. Inflation, though Samuel didn't know that word. His money had been sitting still while the world moved forward without it. He was sitting there in the gray evening light, turning this problem over in his mind, when he noticed his neighbors coming home. One man carried a basket of eggs, his own chickens, scratching around in a yard 2 houses down. A woman balanced a small jug of fresh milk from the goats she kept behind her garden. They moved with a particular kind of ease. Not rich people's ease. Something quieter and more solid than that. The ease of people who had built something small but real. Something that kept giving back. Samuel watched them until they disappeared inside their homes. And then, like a candle being lit in a dark room, a small idea came to him. What if we bought chickens? He almost dismissed it. It felt too small, too ordinary. But then he remembered what ordinary dreams had cost him. 11 years under a tamarind tree, an empty cupboard, a grandson asking for bread in a voice like falling leaves. He decided that small and real was worth infinitely more than big and imaginary. He did not wait for someday. He walked to market the very next morning, jar in hand, and came home with 6 chickens. They were, to put it kindly, not impressive animals. Then, suspicious-looking creatures who regarded Samuel with considerable mistrust. Eli saw them and burst into uncontrollable laughter, running circles around them, while they scattered in alarm. "Grandpa, they're so ugly. Look at them." "They don't need to be beautiful," Samuel said, watching them with a calm, calculating look that was new on his face. "They just need to work." The first egg appeared 3 days later. Samuel held it in his palm for a long moment before calling Clara and Eli over to look at it. All 3 of them stood in a little circle, staring at this ordinary brown egg like it was something extraordinary, which, in a way that mattered, it was. They ate some eggs. They sold some. With that money, Samuel bought 2 more chickens. Then 3 more. He found a battered notebook and began keeping careful records. Every egg collected, every coin earned, every customer who knocked on the door. He learned which neighbors wanted eggs on which days. He learned that selling in the early morning got better prices than the afternoon. He learned that keeping his birds well-fed cost a little more, but produced noticeably better results. He was thinking. Not dreaming, thinking. There is a difference, and Samuel had finally found it. Word spread through the village the way word always spreads in small villages, quickly and with embellishment. People began stopping by the house. A steady, small, reliable stream of customers. Clara started smiling more. Not the polite, tired smile she had been wearing for years, but a real one that reached her eyes. Within a year, Samuel's little flock had become something genuinely worth talking about. Not a farm exactly, but a working, productive, growing thing that earned money every single day, including the days when Samuel was resting. That was the moment he understood what his wife had been trying to tell him for years, what the market merchant had almost said but hadn't quite reached, what all those years under the tamarind tree had been keeping him from. The goal was never just to have money. The goal was to build something that made money, something alive, something that grew, something that worked even when you were asleep. One quiet morning, Samuel sat in the yard with a fresh egg warm in his weathered hand. Eli came and sat beside him, leaning against his arm the way children do. "Grandpa," the boy said, "you're not lazy anymore." Samuel laughed, that deep, unhurried laugh of a man who has made peace with his past. "No, my boy. I finally woke up. Just took me a little longer than most." He turned the egg slowly in his fingers. "You know what this is? This is not just breakfast. This is a machine. A small, feathered, clucking machine that creates value every single day. A jar of coins just sits there getting smaller. But this becomes more of itself." Eli thought about it seriously, the way children think about things when they sense something important is being said. "So the secret was the chickens?" "The secret," Samuel said quietly, "was deciding to stop waiting for someday." He told that story to everyone who stood still long enough to hear it. To the young men in the fields. To the fathers at the market. To anyone who reminded him of himself. Someone with good intentions, and a comfortable spot under a tree, and a long list of things they were going to do eventually. He always finished it the same way. "Saving money," he would say, leaning forward, voice dropping just slightly, "is like carrying river water in your bare hands. You can squeeze as tight as you want. It still finds the cracks. It still slips away. But if you take that same water and pour it into the ground, plant something in it, grow something from it, then it doesn't disappear. It comes back. Bigger." My grandfather told me that story once, and then lived the rest of his life as proof of it. He never became famous. He never had a grand business empire. But every single person in his life who needed something, he was able to help. Not because he had saved perfectly, because he had built wisely. The lesson he left me isn't complicated. It doesn't require a degree in finance or a head for numbers. It just requires the courage to stop waiting and start building, with whatever small, ordinary, possibly ugly thing is available to you right now. Stop treating money like something to be locked away and protected. Start treating it like a seed. Seeds don't grow in jars. They grow in soil, in action, in investment, in the small daily decisions to build rather than just preserve. You don't need to start big. Samuel started with 6 unhappy chickens and a cracked notebook. You just need to start. Because someday is a beautiful word. But it is not a real day. Today, however, today is always right here, always available, always waiting for you to do something real with it. And if this story gave you something, a thought, a spark, even just a moment, consider subscribing. More stories like this one are on the way. Stories about ordinary people who figured something important out and changed everything. Share this with someone who needs a push. Sometimes one story, heard at the right moment, is exactly the push that changes a life. See you in the next one.